Thank you. I'll turn it over to Jan, your reaction and your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Maria. Yes, it's wonderful to have this invitation by the Adenauer Stiftung to talk about this subject, which forces me to reflect on it. And reflecting on Twitter, I started really doing only yesterday evening, so my thoughts will be ripe and green. But I will certainly continue reflecting on this as I see the importance. And it's great again to sit next to the king of Twiplomacy on this issue. I'm wondering, though, technology is moving so fast. Where are we going to be 10 years from now? Will this look like we see now Dwight Eisenhower in the 1950s on black and white television? It may be. Things are going very, very, very fast. Twiplomacy is interesting. It's not just for the leaders, and what I understand from what others have said, but it is basically for elites. As Matthias said, it's a diplomatic medium. So the interesting thing is that the president of all presidents, of all populist presidents, Mr. Trump, is using a medium that is basically used by elites rather than the masses. I've not fully worked that out, but it's an interesting one. He's doing that, and we see that the elites are using Twitter, the leaders are using Twitter, but of course the mediators are also using Twitter. And I think there are two varieties of mediators, one the journalists, and the other ones the diplomats. And I'm interested in the diplomats. And I realize that many diplomats are voluntarily on Twitter, but not all of them are voluntarily on Twitter. Actually, there is a kind of a discipline within foreign ministries where foreign ministers tell their staff, you have to be on Twitter. Now that can be quite a chore, as it is an enormous chore for the journalists to be on all these different platforms for a small salary and little time. Equally for diplomats, it's quite a chore to do this basically 10 p.m. on the sofa at home. And what if this is not showing up in your appraisal talk? What is your incentive to be on Twitter? Is there any at all? Well, I think today all diplomats should be on Twitter, but many of them are invisible. The good old faceless diplomats using Twitter as a resource. That's actually what persuaded me in less than 5 minutes that I should be on Twitter. I started using Twitter, I found information I didn't find before, and I thought, well, this is really good. Now I'm also suffering slightly from the discipline, because when you're active on Twitter, it is actually a rigorous discipline on a daily basis. Twitter is a tool that we use. I think it could also be seen as something that is used in a digital environment where diplomacy is enacted, and that increasingly we have people on this planet who are living digital lives. So we're talking about a digital condition, and these are three steps really, three sort of stages, depths in which we can interpret the use of this medium. I've never really looked deep into critical analysis of Twitter, but I think we have to remind ourselves of two things. One, Twitter is a company. And my father and mother taught me that companies are on this planet to make money. Twitter also wants to make money. Twitter has a certain ethics. They don't do business with governments, but they do sell their data to companies. And the companies sell those data again to governments. So I've not looked into this, but I think as journalists, as critical analysts, we have an obligation to look into this side of things. Because what's become clear in the discussions here is the enormous power of the big American platforms. And we, naive Westerners, seem to be so happy about what American companies bring to us. But as we know, it's not all for free. Some of the new businesses transform the economy, and a lot of that money is going to certain places you can imagine where. So a critical attitude towards Twitter. I think also particularly in the Asian setting, it would be good to remind ourselves of the fact that the Western platforms may not be the most sophisticated ones compared to Asian ones, like Line, like KakaoTalk, and that there needs to be a discussion about these different kinds of platforms, why people use them, how they use them, or how countries are or are not successful in exporting these platforms. KakaoTalk, for instance, is a Korean messenger that is quite popular, wider in Asia, and the same is true for Line. So it's not just a Western discussion, it's not just a discussion about American media available for all. As I said, I'm interested in how diplomats use this medium, and initially I thought this was all hype, and but I had to eat my words gradually. And first time I heard Matthias talking about Twiplomacy, I thought, well, it's really about talking to your electorate. This is not about international relations. So, in my humility, Matthias, I have to confess now that you were right before I saw how this has become a tool in international relations. And also at the lower level of diplomacy, which is perhaps slightly more fascinating than all these ranting leaders who are decreasingly believed because of what they say on Twitter. I think the diplomatic value of the American president, what he says on Twitter, like what he now says about North Korea, who really still believes that those are credible threats? So there is a certain inflation of the diplomatic value of the words of the diplomat-in-chief, the highest political authority in the United States, who, as we learned from the previous session, is mainly an entertainer, or first of all, an entertainer with an awful lot of power. So at a lower level, briefly, if I may, what is Twitter used for? Information gathering is, of course, very important. I already mentioned that. But Twitter is also used for other policy purposes, and I think that is the beauty of the medium, that it can actually be used to help people to do good things in foreign policy and to do good things on a global scale. Well known is that at the time of Nepal, many, and I may have mentioned that yesterday, many governments used Twitter, were immediately on Twitter to find their citizens. So that is actually revolutionary in the world of diplomacy, where information channels that are public channels are privileged over government-controlled, closed information channels. Twitter is also used to crowdsource information. So this is where which is originally, some time ago, this was thought as not diplomacy, helping citizens abroad. Now it's one of the core functions of foreign ministries, and that is perhaps more than in public diplomacy, where we saw the rise of these media, these social media like Twitter. Of course, also in public diplomacy I can be sure reaching out to foreign populations. And the dark side of it, we've seen how these media can also be used to reach out to the networks of what I called yesterday your enemies. So to use social media to go into the networks of others. In the core function of diplomacy is negotiation. It's the hardcore of diplomacy. And this is again where social media are very much present, because negotiation takes place long before people meet at the negotiation table, and the framing of issues, the pre-negotiation or circum-negotiation, is very much something in the public sphere. So what we are talking about, what will eventually be on the table, is being decided in the public sphere, and that is where this medium is doing a wonderful job. In negotiations, even secret negotiations like the Iran nuclear talks, at some point Twitter was there. In multilateral talks that have become talks not just between states, but a whole range of different actors, Twitter is going completely wild. At COP21, an app was made available, the COP21 Negotiator, which provided a lot of information about the negotiations, which tells us, shows us another thing, how digital media can be used to know a lot about negotiations, about your own knowledge as well. So I should stop with this, but it's just the basic message is all functions of diplomacy. We see that Twitter comes in and other digital media in one way or another. I personally find it's a wonderful thing how we see how these media have been used in official development aid. Digital for development is not just a wonderful thing, but we see how when farmers can use their mobile phones to see market prices, or vulnerable groups, how pregnant women can use via their mobile phone, can make use of information they need for their health and safety. So Twitter, then finally, just a couple of words on the leaders. And that is just a couple of comments, because as I said, I need to reflect more on this, but I do have a feeling that a lot of this leader activity, we actually see an erosion of the value of their words, the credibility of what they say, and there is a lot of nervosity, because where the US president on Twitter is driving policy via Twitter, we can feel how his own apparatus feels sort of completely bypassed, neglected by the leader in command who wants to react instantly. But we also see very nervous allies. There are countries in the world, also in Asia, let's think of Japan or South Korea, who in their foreign policy, the relationship with the United States is a pillar of everything they stand for in their foreign relationships. Now, when that pillar starts shaking, and when the leader of your main ally becomes so unpredictable, this is making people restless about where this can lead us in international relations. And of course, we all prefer this to run smoothly rather than to have unpleasant surprises. There's more to say about this, but as I said, I need to reflect on it. Two things about the future. One, I think Twitter and other of these media can help us in explaining complexity. And I'm borrowing the words from Mr. Rees in the previous section. Explaining complexity is an important task, and that's where we need all help we can find, including a medium like Twitter. Because after all, it's not just the message, but often also the link with the message that is leading us to explaining complexity in relatively simple ways. Finally, I'm still in a way with some of my initial doubts about Twiplomacy. And some of those initial doubts are whether there is all that much dialogue to this. And a week is a long time in politics. The issues change very quickly. And there is the primacy of domestic politics over international relations. Basically, is my political scientists feeling what leaders are after who are on Twitter is not creating a better world, but creating another period in government. Thank you.